who am I is always a very interesting question, because the name that you are given when you are born is not necessarily the name of who you are, i.e. your spiritual self. And a lot of people change their name during their lifetime because it doesn't resonate with them and they go to something that works a bit better. So who you are really becomes a question of more who you are from a spiritual sense. And I went through a lot of my life questioning who I was, and got to a point where I realized I didn't have to have a name per se. It was more what I did spiritually that was important. And I was connected to Source, and Source explained to me that in the galaxies and in the universe there are a number of spiritual beings that are referred to by him, and the best way he could describe it was as keepers of light. Now, keepers of light are like roving librarians with microphones and video cameras. Is they go around and they record all the vibrational energies of a civilization and existence, and the way they do that is by incorporating into that existence. So they would incarnate into a human form and experience all the things that go on in a human form, and thereby recording it all in their DNA, which is a cosmic DNA. And they would spend hundreds, thousands of lives on a particular planet, recording everything. In particular, like on Earth, I've had over 4,000 lives here. Can I remember them all? No, I can't. But I get flashes every now and then when it becomes relevant. And then that's just on this planet, and there's been other lives on other planets as well. So you get this like a massive library, and the library exists in not just visual images, not just sound recordings, but also in emotions. And every form of possible experience is recorded. And it was explained to me that that's who I was, and that was my function here. And when I got that explanation, it made my whole life make sense about why I hadn't fitted in with the mainstream population, and why I had things in my head that were totally in conflict with what the so-called experts were saying, particularly like with things like Egypt. Every time I read a book on Egyptology, I'd go, that's wrong, that the timings are wrong. And so then it came down to, well, understanding that who you are is more important than what your name is. And, you know, if we talk about God, well, God is a name that people on this planet have given that consciousness. God itself has no name and has no need for a name. So whenever people argue about whether it's God, or whether it's Krishna, or whether it's Allah, or whether it's Jehovah, or whatever, God's laughing, because he said, I'm none of those, and I'm all of them. You can call me whatever you want, it doesn't change what I am. You know, if I take a book and I hold it up and I say, this is a book, and everyone goes, yeah, yeah, and then I pull that up and I say, no, this is a cat. Whatever you call it doesn't change what it is. Okay, we're the only beings that seem to be so preoccupied with, you know, what our name is. And that's to do with our ego. We have an ego for a purpose, and that's part of the process of why we're here. The process of being here is to experience, end of story, just to experience, is our higher consciousness. And if we understand there is only oneness, there is only the collective consciousness, there is only the source, there is only the singularity, the void, whatever you want to call it, it is a point, an infinite point of nothingness, an infinite point of consciousness. So it's all things and no things at the same time. And for it to truly know what it was, it needs a mirror. You know, you don't know what you look like until you look in a mirror. And once you've looked in a mirror, you go, oh, that's what I look like. Okay? Until that time, you have no understanding of what you look like. You don't know what you sound like until you record yourself and play yourself back. And anybody who's done that will tell you, oh, it doesn't sound anything like me. And everyone says, no, that's what you sound like. So our mirrors are not always complete. For instance, what we see in a mirror is a mirror image, not a photograph. And if you actually hold up a photograph of yourself while you look in the mirror, the two images are totally different. So what we see is often a reflection of everything that we're not rather than everything that we are. So we need some sort of feedback system, some sort of mechanism by which we can know ourselves. And this is what Source decided to do. It said, I need a mechanism by which I can truly know myself. So it created the absence of itself. And in doing that, created a process of fragmentation. And we are just a very small fragment of that consciousness. Like if I take a drop of water out of the ocean, it's still part of the ocean unless it chooses to think it's not. Okay? But it's a fragment of the whole. And what it's doing is it's choosing to experience itself through these contrasts, through these absences of itself. So the purpose of our life is to experience stuff so that we can become aware of our consciousness. And we're doing that from a higher level down. We're coming down to say, I'm going to choose to experience things in the mirror because that will enrich my true knowing of myself because I'll have experienced it rather than just known it. What's the point to all of this life? And it's really simply answered. Why do you go to watch a movie? To be entertained. That's exactly what it is. Or you might go to a documentary to be informed. So the whole purpose of life is to find out more about yourself and to be entertained. You don't actually have to do anything. Okay? Things will happen along the way, the same way as in a movie things happen, but you don't have to do anything. The script's already written so that it will happen to you. So why are we here? We are here to experience the third dimension. The third dimension is slowed down energy. Everything comes from Source. Source is the highest vibration and all vibrations. But it started with the highest form. And then it starts to slow itself down. So as you come down through dimensional levels, and they're like, look, it's like a train track going from one place to another. There are train stops along the way which will have labels, but everywhere is continuous. So there's no fifth dimension and then a break, and then fourth dimension and then third. It's like coming down through visible light. You know, if you look at a rainbow, you can't really say where red becomes orange, becomes yellow, becomes green and blue. It's a continuous shift and change. So this vibrational frequency coming down gets to a point where the more it slows down, it becomes light. And then from light it slows down, eventually becomes sound. And from sound it slows down and eventually becomes matter. So matter is slowed down sound in this spectrum. So the third dimension is the lowest form of vibration. Okay, and there are subsonic aspects of sound below which we can't hear and we can't see, and subsonic aspects of matter, but they're considered the third dimension. And the third dimension is the highest forms of density and the lowest forms of vibration in terms of this whole field. So it's a way of slowing down things. And if you think about it, if somebody's talking to you really fast and you can't understand them, you say, slow down, slow down. And as they slow down their words, you get a greater understanding. So the third dimension is Source's way of getting a greater understanding of who it is by slowing down everything to a point where you can actually understand more detail. Like in a film. If I run it through really fast, it all happens. But if I want a detail on a particular frame or something, I have to do it in slow motion so I can see the real detail. And I can slow it down and I can just pick one frame out and I can analyze that frame. That's all that Source is doing. Source is slowing things down into a third dimensional concept. And the core teaching is to love one another. Okay, that's the core teaching because it comes from the highest aspects. And all the highest aspects have come through, all the way through. They come through love one another. But the minute you start ritualizing it, the minute you start controlling it with hierarchies of who can get to what and who can't, now you're bringing in fear. And it's using fear to control the masses. If you don't do this, you'll go to hell. If you don't do this, you'll get your head cut off. If you don't follow the laws exactly, you're going to go to hell, you're going to get stoned, you're going to do it. So now you're controlling people by fear, not by love. which is totally against the core aspect of all simple religions, which says to love one another. So all the stuff that's been added, which people say is the Word of God, is not the Word of God. It's the word of various people trying to put themselves up and control. And where does that come from? That's the Illuminati coming in and taking control and setting things up. And once you've created 2 or 3 religions, well, you can set them against one another. And that's why they created countries. Because now you can set countries against each other. And the thing is, the Illuminati create all the wars on the planet. And they've created them all since 1300. Okay? Because the Illuminati are the very first weapons merchants. They became so rich because of discoveries they made in the Crusades that they became richer than the state, richer than the church, and they were the power brokers in Europe. And they were the weapons manufacturers. So they sold weapons to everyone, and they're still doing it. The Illuminati supplied weapons to the Nazis and the Americans in the Second World War. And every single other war that you want to name, if you follow the paper trail, it all comes back to the same people. We're supplying weapons to both sides. So, of course, the more wars they are, the more money they make. And because they control the governments, what they do is they set the governments up against one another and they manufacture wars that aren't there, so that they can continue to exploit the people, keep them controlled, because while they're fighting wars against one another, whether it's be religion or whatever it is, they can keep making money out of them and just exploit them. Exploit, 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 use, use, use. And that's why they think people are stupid. The greatest answer to that is, define what God is first, and then I can tell you whether I believe in it or whether it exists. Because everyone has a totally different answer to that, of what God is. Some people see God as a separate being that is all-powerful, that they have to submit to. Some people don't even believe there's a God. And you say, well, how do you explain the whole universe and everything? They'll come up with science's explanation. And science's explanation is changing every 24 hours as they come up with new information. Science is something that continually proves itself wrong. That's what science is. And you only have to look at the history of science. 100 years ago, man couldn't fly. Impossible. Oh, now man can.